This is Isaiah Jerez here with Jamela Christian. She's a real estate agent here in Las Vegas and Henderson, Nevada. She's going to share with us her story when she took a leap of faith along with her family and she became a real estate agent. She's going to share with us today where the housing market is today and where she sees it going.
Jamela Christian, your local Las Vegas real estate agent. I'm excited to be here with my good friend Isaiah, and I'm excited to share with you just some points that I think will be really helpful and useful in today's market. I hope that it helps.
And Jamela, if people want to look for you, where can they find you?
You can find me on social media on Instagram at Jamela Christian, or feel free to give me a call at 702-518-3840.
Yeah, so Jamela, so you're currently a real estate agent, is that right?
I am.
But your career path hasn't led directly to real estate, right? I think for a while you worked directly with the government.
Absolutely. So yeah, it's definitely been a journey. Initially being able to start out with the government, transitioning over into the banking space, which I was in prior to government. In addition to that, moving forward into real estate. I think that they all have a great impact on what that looks like today, with me being able to really be strong and really just solid in the real estate space.
Yeah, and making that move from the government to the real estate seems to be kind of a bit of risky. And a lot of people who I know that work for the government, they really enjoy it because they have a lot of benefits. They're really PERS, retirement that they're going to be able to really rely on in the future. And so for them to make the risk of, okay, having that security, the benefits for the family, the benefits for the retirement, the same paycheck, and then jump into real estate where you're basically just eating when you're killed, right? Like where you have to go out and you have to work to really earn that money. How did you make that jump? Because at the same time, you had 2 kids and a husband, right?
Absolutely. That jump was truly a leap of faith. I wish that I can tell you that it was something different. Unfortunately, it wasn't. It was truly me being able to focus on finding my passion, finding my purpose. And in that moment is when I found out that being able to actually serve others and to be a voice of reason, to have others' best interests, and to truly help guide and make sure that people are knowledgeable when it comes to real estate, buying, selling, or investing, that's where I was supposed to be. And when I did it, I'll never forget, I took a trip right before I left my government job or banking job with all the actual retirement funds and things of that nature that were consistent. Vacation days, those are no longer a thing.
Vacation days, right?
No longer a thing. Outside of that, prior to doing that, I literally went on a trip. It was actually a women's conference, which we do every year, really being able to focus on spirituality and kind of what that means for our future, focusing on our purpose. And when I took that trip, I'll never forget, I came back and I thought, what did I do? Left my job and here I am. My phone literally did not ring, and it was just like, okay, well, here I am transitioning into this new space, and I've taken a leap of faith. What do I do? Unfortunately, well, should I say fortunately, going back to that, I realized that it was 7 days for me to rest and to really focus on being able to start this new journey. In the moment, I didn't understand that. On day 7, my phone started ringing, and it never stopped. But I feel like that was God's way of being able to really put me on a journey and a path to say, okay, take your trip, go do your conference, and then aside from that, when you come back, rest up because the journey is going to begin. And I'm so grateful because the reality is that, like I mentioned prior, I did not see that coming, but moving forward, that was kind of the journey, and I feel honored and blessed because ultimately, I'm not in a space anymore, 6.5 years into the industry, to where, to your point, like you said, what you kill, you eat. Instead, it's actually referrals. It's good, solid business practices that's leading to 100% of referrals when it comes to business. So I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, and I want to dive into a little bit about this conference that you went to. So the conference, you're taking vacation time from your job to go to this conference?
Correct. Vacation time as well as a 2-week notice. That ended, absolutely. That ended prior to me going to this conference. That is correct.
And this was a women's conference focused on industry and faith at the same time, spirituality?
Really good question. It was actually simply spirituality. And at that moment, I had no idea when I signed up for it. It was actually me and a really good friend who was really on a spiritual journey as well at that moment. And in that conference, it was actually titled Fearless. So when I showed up, I had no idea what I was in for. But it was a conference that was really being able to focus on me helping to walk through this path that was life-changing.
Yeah, one of the things that I love in the scriptures, it often says that thou shalt not fear. It's almost like a commandment.
Absolutely.
It's not to fear, to have faith, like you're talking about, right?
Absolutely.
Forward. So this women's conference that you're going to, that's focused on spirituality, actually help you take a step in the business. Tell me a little bit about that, because it would seem like that would be almost kind of contradictory.
Absolutely. So I showed up there to the conference. Essentially, it was me and two other young ladies. I was in San Jose, California. I'll never forget. And when I showed up there, oftentimes it talked about fear and it talked about biblical principles as it relates to fear, and that's of the adversary, and really being able to focus on and to lean into what God has for you, and to figure out what our purpose is. And it just essentially went completely into what had already kind of been laid out prior to me actually leaving my corporate job. So in turn, it was just more so the fuel to the fire to know that you're on the right path, even if it doesn't feel like it. Just surrender and trust and know that you are where you're supposed to be.
So is it almost like you went from a job, kind of 9 to 5, working and kind of moving forward, working for money, to shifting and saying, this is my calling. This is where I feel like I can best serve other people.
Absolutely. And that's where I was on that journey in my life in 2018. Just very important, because the reality is that living a life without being able to tap in and to actually exhaust your purpose is pointless. So in turn, that was actually my journey.
Cool. How did your husband take it, right? I'm sure he enjoyed the benefits, right? Consistency, knowing, when you go to work and you're going to come home, right? How did he feel about that transition to say, okay, Jamela's going to go into an industry where her phone's going to be ringing 24/7. There's going to be no vacations, right? And those steady benefits, they're not going to be there anymore. How did he react?
Absolutely. I can say that I had the most support that anyone could ever ask for. The reality is that I think it came down to just being able to watch that journey prior to the jump, and prior to leap of faith, and understand all the sacrifices that I had made prior to that. And in making those sacrifices, it really came down to the ability of like, she's committed, she's serious, she's definitely going to do it. And I have full faith that she's going to actually come out on the other side of this much better than she went in.
Yeah, that's amazing. I went to my uncle's 50-year wedding anniversary some time ago, and I remember him saying very clearly that the marriage was between 3 people. It was between him and his wife and God.
Yes.
And they ought to work together. And so that sounds like that's wonderful, that your husband did the same thing, to say, okay, he could see the focus that you had and the direction that you had. Maybe had a little bit of vision that said, hey, yeah, I'm going to put my faith in her and stand behind her. And how about the kids? Did the kids even realize what they were getting themselves into?
That's a really good question. I just remember the actual long days, the long nights, and it's like, where have you been? And it's like, well, I'm working today. Like, we're going to hang out tomorrow. But really just being intentional with being able to set those dates with both my son and my daughter, and trying to create that one-on-one quality time. And then, of course, together as a family, that was very critical in that timeline. However, I think Zaya did not quite realize it. However, Z was like, what is going on? Like, you're never here. Like, you're working a lot. And the concept of, Mom, you're working too hard. And I go, don't worry. It's all going to be, for the best moving forward, and obviously fruitful.
Yeah. So one-on-one time, focus on, it sounds like you schedule that in your calendar each week, each month. How do you
Absolutely.
go about doing that?
For sure, it had to be weekly. If I did not, then I could fly right by and work right through it without even realizing it. So I think just really being intentional with understanding that quality time was very important, despite this new industry that I was breaking in, because I believe that my family will always come first.
Yeah, being able to put your family first. And for myself, when I started to grow my business, that was a big focus for me, is my family. What is my family going to see? When I graduated law school, got out of working for the insurance industry and started working for people that were injured, I found a very good balance between my life and my work, where I didn't have to work too much and I could be there with my family. And it got to a point where I kind of questioned, if my children see me working 20 to 30 hours a week, what type of influence am I showing to them? And so that was kind of part of the inspiration for me to say, okay, I want to work hard. I want to show my children what the benefits will be if I work hard. But yeah, it's difficult. I fall into that same kind of trap that you're talking about. Like, if you don't schedule those appointments with the children, time goes by quickly.
It does, and they grow up very fast.
Yeah. And your oldest boy, Z, he's now
22.
22 years old. And then your youngest, your daughter,
Zaya is 14.
she's 14.
Yes.
Okay. And so you've seen that time accelerate since 2018 when you jumped into the industry. And so are you able to do that consistently then on a weekly basis to get that one-on-one with them? And how does it work when you have an older child?
Absolutely. I can definitely tell you that the actual intention was definitely set. Every once in a while, I actually missed a week. As much as I would love to say that in turn, like in a perfect world, that it could definitely happen weekly, there were some times that we were not able to do that. However, in turn, being able to really have the conversation and to communicate, and then now moving forward, being able to focus on that quality time as well, it kind of turns into now I'm actually asking for access to their schedules rather than being able to schedule it when it works for me. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, that's a huge shift in, I guess, mentality, and maybe takes a little bit of humility, right, as well.
Sure.
You're the mother, you're the one that's in charge of the household, but yet you're taking a step back and allowing them to find that time to schedule.
Absolutely.
That's pretty amazing. And so now your daughter being 14 years old, how are those conversations now shifted? Now you're a successful business lady, and so what are those conversations that you're having with your daughter now?
That's a really good question. And anymore, the conversations really turn out to be, Mom, like I'm very grateful for all that you've done, for all the sacrifices that you've made. And as a parent, which I'm sure you could relate to, it's always nice to hear that because oftentimes you're like, well, like you just do it without even, having to think about it. However, in turn, to have your kid notice that, that's always important. And I've noticed how the ability of hard work, as well as being able to build really good, solid relationships and, just being an actual um, just being able to be a role model for her is very important because she sees it. And some of the things that I've actually done or that I do daily, she's starting to emulate those things and the good things, which is great.
Yeah, that's awesome that you recognize those, because I think I have to fall into the trap where I recognize those bad things and I look in in the mirror and it's like they're just, monkey see, monkey do. They're just doing exactly what I do, and then I get upset. But oftentimes I have to look in the mirror, but then to point out to her, to say, recognize that, the things that she's learning that from you, those positive things, and to affirm her choices in life as well. It's going to be very powerful to see her succeed.
Absolutely. And she's very motivated, and we talk about just entrepreneurial opportunities for her. She's really focusing on kind of what that looks like for her. She's already implemented a few things in her actual life already to kind of put her in a position to where she gets the opportunity to kind of have a space for entrepreneurship, much like babysitting or pet sitting. So that's always really cool, and she loves it. And once again, what I love the most is that rather than wait, all these years to figure out what your purpose and your passions are, I think it's so important to catch them right where they are, and then to help them identify them and to allow them to try it. Give it a shot. If you fall short, it's okay. But if you love it, then you are ahead of the game. So I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, that's a huge inspiration you can give her. Hey, if you fell in there,
Absolutely.
right? If you fell, you can pick yourself back up and keep edging on, but you've got to try.
Yes.
If you don't try, you're never going to know, right?
Correct.
And one more question about your daughter, not to necessarily put her on the spot, but so she just started high school.
She did.
And I believe she's going to a tech school, right?
She is.
Was that, well, I guess, as a parent, I've been through that as well. How do you make that decision to help your children decide whether or not to go to just a traditional school or a tech school or a charter school?
Absolutely. I think just one, as a parent, obviously we want what's best for our children, especially when it comes to education. That's extremely important, right? So we've actually chosen charter over the years. However, when being able to look at high school, I think that timeline is extremely critical for them to really be able to be in a space that's going to encourage them, that's going to challenge them, and to really push them into doing something that they're interested in. Thankfully, they actually get to choose majors. So when choosing a major, it's kind of like college, right? You figure out what you like, you give it a shot, you'll be interning for a certain period of time, and if you like it, great, you already have experience in being able to do that trade. And if you don't quite like it, then you have the ability to shift right out of school. You can graduate and then from there go into something different when you actually consider your college plans. So it's really nice, and the actual opportunity to have choice when it comes to schools is very important, but I don't think that's something that we're willing to actually compromise on overall when it comes to that for our children.
Yeah, yeah, it's wonderful that you're there for her to help her make that choice, and
Sure.
you're home with her, and can help her realize what the potentials are as well.
Absolutely.
So I want to shift a little bit and talk about real estate.
Sure.
And I guess this week there was something pretty significant in the fact that you have was it the NAR that is then going to say that um, because buyers agents generally would get paid by the seller's agent, is that right?
That is correct.
And so now I guess this NAR regulation that said, I kind of said, no, you're not allowed to do that anymore, right?
Correct.
How is that going to affect the buyer's agent? What do you see? Is that going to bring down home prices? What is going to happen with that?
I'm really glad that you asked, Isaiah. This new change, in my opinion, I think it's great. I think it really creates a level of transparency that everyone needs, that everyone deserves, especially when it comes to sellers, because obviously being able to show up, for example, to list your home for you. We're talking about commissions as it relates to what you'd be responsible for covering as far as my costs and my services and what I'm going to do for you. However, in the past, as a buyer, that commission was automatically added to that, essentially just the process, right? For the actual buyer's agent's commission. But in turn, now it requires the buyer's agent to actually show value, articulate their value, and then of course being able to actually really follow through with letting the actual buyers know there's a cost for my services. This is what it's going to be. This is what comes with it. Here's what I'm going to do for you. But in turn, if those things can't be clarified and understood, then I think it really narrows down the ability to really be successful in the industry. Monetarily, obviously there is success in many ways, not necessarily just monetarily, but really being able to actually show value and to be compensated for your time rather than what the actual sellers are willing to give. And obviously the choice is the sellers. They could go as little as not offering an actual commission at all or referral fee at all to the actual buyer's agent, which in turn the buyer would be responsible for the full amount, whatever that is. In that case, it's obviously all negotiable. Or if the actual seller is offering like a discounted amount or the full amount, they're subjected to the seller's options rather than being able to actually automatically know what they're entitled to.
So how are you managing that right now? And in your position when you're dealing with buyers, how do you handle that on the front end?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, as far as buyers are concerned, I can tell you that because I'm very much so, I follow the rules and I've done business this way since I got into the business. So, unfortunately, it's not a change for me. Or should I say, fortunately, it's not a change for me. And just essentially overall, like this is how I've been doing business since day one. It's important to sit down with buyers, to have a consultation so that they understand the process, they understand your services, they understand most things as it relates to buying a home and being able to actually provide them with an actual buyer packet. And in turn, that's going to explain things, but outside of that, it'll kind of reinforce when they have those questions when you're answering them. And then, of course, talk about the costs, explain to them what that means and how the laws and all these changes with NAR will directly impact them. And when they understand that, they're informed. And at that point, you're not really talking about dollars and things of that nature later. You're addressing it right up front.
And so it sounds like what you're saying, you've been following the rules for quite a while, and so basically it's just kind of helping you point out, what's happening in the industry, and I guess leveling the playing field a little bit for you amongst other realtors.
Absolutely. I believe that ultimately being able to actually get in the game and to do it the right way is very important. When we don't, it becomes changes that become impactful. And I hope that most or all agents are able to actually weather the storm if they have not been doing it, not necessarily the right way, but doing it this way. I think it's great. I'm excited about it. And as always, I feel blessed because I have not experienced an actual season in my business where it's been down or it's been, without. And I know that once again, it ties back into purpose and understanding that what God has for you is for you. No one can come in between that. So I feel blessed.
Yeah, and you're putting in the effort as well, right? You're talking about working hard, right? You're not sitting back. And, my understanding is a lot of real estate agents still have a big sell, and then all of a sudden they'll just take time off, and they have to come back and they realize, okay, like, where's the money at? But when you have that big sell, you just got to keep moving forward, right? You can't take, maybe you take a little bit of time off, but you can't take a big time off, right? You got to keep moving forward and working hard and working because it could shut off this big, shut off pretty quickly.
Sure.
No influx of money.
Yep. You take time off, you don't get paid. There's no vacation days.
Yeah, right. I mean, I try to take vacation days, but at the same time, it's like my phone's always ringing, something's going on, and being accessible, being available, not only for my clients, but also for my team as well.
Absolutely.
It's important. I want to show them, hey, I'm here. We're all in this together. And that availability, and, it comes with a cost for sure.
Sure. And you know what? I'd like to actually kind of speak to availability. And I say that only because oftentimes being an entrepreneur or in business, running your own business, I think that becomes the biggest challenge for us. And uh, essentially, I've made an actual commitment to myself, to my family, that I would not work Sundays. Anyone who knows me understands that I don't work Sundays. That's the one day that I take off to actually spend time with my family, to focus on, my commitments and my personal things. And they understand that, and I'm very grateful. But oftentimes people are like, well, what do you mean you don't work Sundays? Like, that's a really busy day of the week. And I think ultimately, with being able to have people respect you, respect your time, that's more important to me than the ability to actually say, hey, well, I need you on a Sunday. Obviously, if there's an actual fire or a flood, call me on a Sunday. Anything outside of that, we'll address first thing Monday morning, bright and early.
Yeah, that is amazing because I just a vision. People want to see home. Sunday's a great time because the family's together. Nobody's necessarily at work, right? They can go out together and they can go look at homes. But yeah, you made a decision. That's your time. That's your family's time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
6 days a week, you have access to me, and I work pretty long hours. I will definitely accommodate your schedule, but on Sunday, that is definitely family time.
And going back to what you're talking about, that's your faith in God as well, right? I'm going to put this day aside for my family and focus on them. And that's what we talked about in the scriptures as well, right? To Sabbath day is not for the Lord. Sabbath day is for man, right? It's for us to kind of recharge our batteries and put priority to what priority should be as well.
Absolutely. And you said it, we have to recharge. The reality is that if we're working 7 days a week and we're accommodating everyone else's schedule, when do we have time to recharge and to refresh? And I think when that happens, we can actually give our best. When we're just flying through 7 days a week for months on end, years on end, I don't believe that we're able to perform at capacity that's beneficial to others. So I'm very intentional about that as well.
Yeah, I remember I had this wonderful client. I love her so much. She called me. I'm just getting ready to sit down to eat with the family, and I tell her, I got to call you back and then sit down and eat with the family. And she was very respectful of that. And even to the day that when we finished her case, she reminded me of that. Right? She reminded me that was so impactful for her to say, okay, here's an attorney that will put his family first. And it takes a lot of commitment. Some people don't appreciate it, right? But for those people that do appreciate it, it kind of reaffirms my decision, I guess, and doing that. It sounds like you have the same with some of your clients as well.
The same exact vision, because the reality is that if someone respects your time, they'll respect you as a person. If your time's not respected, and especially in that case with family and things of that nature, then that's typically someone that you don't want to do business with. And with all due respect to them, the reality is that we're all here to serve in some capacity. But at the same time, I think that respect always comes first.
Yeah, and I want to dive into that a little bit, with people who don't respect you, because just like real estate, right, it's the same in my industry where, I'm only able to get, compensated for the cases that I work on, that I win on, right, the ones that I close, just like you've got to close the deal to get paid. And, I work with people who are injured in a very tough time in their lives.
Sure.
And there's a lot of stress factors involved. And so I kind of recognize those. I try to be patient with them when they use me as a punching bag because, the insurance companies don't move as quickly as we want them to. But it sometimes gets to a point where, where the client's disrespect towards me just goes overboard. And then even though I might have a lot of money and time invested, I've got to take a step back and say, okay, I'm not going to allow myself to be put through this or my team to be put through this. And that's a tough decision, is to wipe that away. Number one, I feel bad for the person because I recognize what they're going through. But then, and number two, you have a bunch of time and money invested in it that you're losing. And how do you deal with that?
Yes. So when it comes to difficult clients, and obviously to your point, we all have really rough times in our life that we go through. And then in turn, essentially it comes out to where those who are closest to us become our punching bags. And I'll tell you that oftentimes it's being able to actually come from a place of just grace and understanding people, knowing where they are. I have a really good sense of that early on at the buyer consultation or the listing presentation to say, hey, what's going on? Let me know how I can help you. What's important to you? Once I find those things out, then at that point I can actually, essentially I can maneuver accordingly to what their needs are. Unfortunately, as you know, we are not able to actually make everyone happy. So in that space, it comes down to figuring out if I can actually serve you and to help you and to guide you and get you to where you want to be, I'm the right agent for you. If in the event I cannot, or we have some sort of difference to where, to your point, punching bags and things of that nature, I don't subject myself to any of that. There's no need for it. And the reality is that I'm going to go above and beyond to help you as best as I can. But in the event that that happens or things don't go quite right, then at that point, I will definitely kind of walk away from the client and let them know that I have another referral source for them and that I'm not the right agent for them.
Going back to the current state of the market and the difficulty for buyers and for sellers, right? Because it appears that there's a huge supply issue, maybe stemming back to the fact that a lot of people have interest rates on their homes that are sub 3%, and so not willing to sell because they just have such great interest. And right now the interest rate, I think, is a little bit above 6%.
Sure.
where it's currently at. So what are some other factors that are stressing the market right now other than the supply and the interest rate?
I would say right now, election year is always a challenge. And it is because oftentimes people will say, yeah, well, if this person wins or if that person wins, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. Or they're just not really wanting to make moves at that moment until they find out kind of what comes of that. And it kind of ties into personal preference. Outside of that, at the end of the year, the market tends to actually slow down during the holiday season. People who are actually out looking for homes are seriously looking for homes because obviously that's the time for us to spend with our families and to really focus on all of the major holidays that are going to be impacting us at the end of the year, and then aside from that, really just focused on if there's a need. Do I have a need to actually upgrade, to downgrade, or an actual medical issue, or unfortunately divorce? There's just so many instances where unfortunately we can't get around the ability to hold on to that subprime or just that particular interest rate that's going to be really hard to let go of, right? People really have to focus on what their need is and to find a solution in that moment.
So how have you been able to be creative dealing with the interest rates or the lack of supply and helping the buyers?
Absolutely. We've been actually in the market focusing on assumable loans. Those are actually a major plus. They can be a little lengthy, full disclosure. However, overall, understanding the value of being able to get into that home at 3%, to your point, rather than 6.5%, it's a major difference as it relates to costs, and affordability, as we all know, has been a challenge for most people, especially those who are actually entering the market for the first time as first-time home buyers. That's a really big challenge for them. So really assumable loans and really being able to kind of speak through the idea of understanding renting versus buying. In a space that where you're wasting your money, it's 100% interest when you're renting. And unfortunately, we have the ability to focus on really being able to tie into buying a home, building equity, and then of course that 6.5%, 7% doesn't look too bad after all.
So talking about an assumable loan, how do those work? Because I imagine that you probably have to come up with maybe even larger down payment to do an assumable loan, or are they getting two separate loans?
Absolutely.
To help ease that burden of having to come up with such a large down payment?
So it'll definitely be case by case. The assumable loan, the actual bigger benefit that comes from it, is, of course, is the interest rate. And then outside of that, let's just say, for example, you're buying a home that's worth $400,000 and they owe $200,000 on it. To your point, you'd have to come in with a very big down payment. And some people have the means to do that. And we're seeing that we're finding parents and grandparents that are really, injecting quite a bit of funds into their grandchildren and children to help them actually afford purchasing homes. And then outside of that, if that's not the case, they don't have that kind of cash. Sometimes creative financing can definitely work out when when you're talking about the assumable loans, but it's case by case, kind of based on what's available in that moment.
And that's got to be pretty attractive for a seller as well, saying, okay, if I have an assumable loan, then I'm going to be able to put my house on the market. It's going to be more attractive to a buyer. How do I know whether or not the loan that I have is assumable?
Absolutely. So that's actually the first conversation that we have at the at the actual listing presentation. So when I show up to your house and you say, hey, I want to sell my home, we're going to have a conversation in regards to kind of just your loan type, what your interest rate is, all the details of that. And then in turn, it becomes a little bit of homework to find out if the loan's assumable, what's the timeline, does the bank honor it, is it assumable loan? Some loans are actually not assumable. So in that case, that wouldn't be an option, but essentially being able to figure that out right up front and understanding and giving that information to the public so that they can understand that it's a 4-month process or a 6-month process. It's very imperative that we have that right up front.
And going back to the point that you were saying, if you're renting, you're just throwing all that money away. You're not building any type of equity, any type of wealth for yourself or for your family. But with the interest rate so high, I start to look at some of the numbers, and the numbers don't match up, right? If I have to pay $3,000 for a mortgage versus $2,000 for rent, that math doesn't, and then I've got to come up with a down payment as well. That math just doesn't add up, and it makes sense to rent.
Absolutely. I think we have to figure out, or they'll have to figure out kind of what makes the most sense, and being able to actually say, am I in a position today to jump into the market to buy something? And over the course of time, do I build enough equity? How long am I going to be staying in this home? Really ask themselves those important questions, because that's what it comes down to. And it's going to be case by case based on their situation. But to your point, overall, the affordability portion, that's definitely a challenge. And we're seeing a lot of generational living where we have the parents and the grandparents and the grandchildren living together. They're focused on home ownership, but it becomes an actual 6 months to a year to save those funds to jump into the market at that point. But lots of creativity that's happening. And I think really being able to set pride aside, it gives them the opportunity to really jump into the market, to have the ability to buy versus to actually rent at 100%.
Yeah, and that generational living, I've seen that in some of the new homes where they'll have like almost not a casita, but it'll be attached to the house, but it'll be just a door that'll separate. They'll have their own separate kitchen, living area, and bedroom. And so it sounds like that's a huge benefit, because then they're able to add in the two different incomes, right? Whether or not it's just a Social Security check, and then a family, but then they can live together as well. And I love that idea of the families coming back together, bonding with each other, supporting each other, not looking for help outside, but just looking for help within the family, and to be there and to be there for each other. I remember when I was little, my grandma lived in my dad's basement, and I don't know the exact reason, but I really enjoyed that, right? Seeing my grandma and my dad living together.
That's awesome. And I think oftentimes anymore, we get so busy with work and with life, we find ourselves kind of a little disconnected from family, especially immediate family. And in this instance, there's benefit for everybody, right? The grandparents, unfortunately, like you said, I keep saying unfortunately, the grandparents are actually, on an actual fixed income. So in turn, it comes down to the ability to help the grandparents where they're not spending all of their funds on rent, utilities, groceries, so on and so forth. And then, of course, the actual youth who are actually looking to jump into the market as first-time home buyers, they're able to actually save money before they actually have a down payment to buy a property. And then, of course, the actual parent, like the first-time home buyers' parents, essentially, they would be focused on really kind of the glue of holding it all together for the benefit of everybody. But everybody's benefiting off of that opportunity to really have that everybody in the same house and bonding, and you kind of can just focus on the bigger goal rather than just one goal. You're focusing on three.
Yeah, right. Being able to, bring the family together. And I love that. My dad just moved back down here to be with us, and it's wonderful. I see my 3-year-old play with him, and my dad's a little bit older now, but my 3-year-old just gets so excited when he comes over, and just being able to play with him. And that, living in another state is just it's not possible. Right, but being close to each other and being able to build that bond right now, because we never know how long we're going to have with our parents.
Absolutely.
And sort of take really advantage of that time and to be with them. And so that generational housing, I love that. I think if that were to be one of the consequences of our current housing market, I think that's a huge benefit.
It sure is. It sure is, and it really just opens up opportunities that we wouldn't otherwise have available to us, especially in a market where we're having challenges with affordability.
And going back again to the supply issue, what are you seeing that, whether or not it's, local municipalities or private contractors, what are they doing to help, I guess, resolve that supply issue? Because here in Vegas, we're kind of limited in how much land we have. A lot of the land around us is just BLM land.
Sure. So we're seeing some of that become available. Obviously not as quickly as we needed to, like most things, as it relates to being able to kind of have access. outside of that, really being able to focus on the new builders, or the actual current builders in the market who are building new homes. They are moving very diligently to get homes built. However, to your point, if we're actually limited on land, we're seeing a lot of apartment communities. They're calling them luxury apartments, and they're really making the best use of their space because they're building up. So it's 5 stories, right? So really being able to house most people with the least amount of land.
And those luxury apartments, are those units that are for rent or units that are for sale?
They are for rent. So they're capitalizing on the ability to, one, help out with the affordability issue. But aside from that, like you said, if you're looking to buy something, like, yeah, you'll have condo towers that are going up. One in particular, the actual Four Seasons that's going up, which is the first condo tower here in the city of Henderson, like that at that capacity, that's going up over at McDonald Ranch, McDonald Highlands. That's a big project that's coming. However, once again, it's being able to house more people. That one's for sale. House more people with the ability of going up rather than out.
And thinking about the area, that's not necessarily going to, when you talk about affordability, we're talking about affordability for maybe more business professionals, or, maybe, those that are working as a blackjack dealer, for example. But affordability, like if we're talking about people who are generally, would be recognized in Section 8, what does Henderson do for those, for that population?
That's a really good question, because the reality is that if they're on Section 8, obviously they have the ability to kind of go throughout the city. They're not limited to one area. However, it's really based on the owners as it relates to accepting the program. And it has a little bit of a nasty notion behind it, just based on unfortunate experiences. But I'm sure that you would agree with me that some people are actually on the program and they've fallen short, and essentially they have not been subjected to that type of lifestyle ever in their life. They just kind of ran into a hard time. Others, it's actually generational, where it's been multiple generations on the program. But I don't believe that everyone that's a part of that program is going to have an actual story that becomes unfortunate for a landlord, of their house being destroyed or things not being taken care of, and just really horrible experiences. So it really comes to the ability of being able to be knowledgeable of how to actually screen appropriately, how to become a good landlord, and to really create that connection with your tenant so that they can take care of your home, but at the same time, a little bit of accountability as it relates to things being paid on time, the level of care. People sometimes just don't know, but if you know better, then you do better. So I think really being able to be open-minded when it comes to it, and understanding that it's not all, there definitely could be a few bad apples, but overall, that doesn't, create the concept or the consensus that it's everyone on the program.
Yeah, and the opportunity that you provide for that family and the kids, right, for the youth, because they're going to be in a different neighborhood. They're going to know different youth that have different focus as well. They're going to know, different leaders in the community. They're going to provide opportunities or an example that they maybe might not see in a different neighborhood as well.
Absolutely. I believe that we're all a product of our environment. So in turn, if they're used to something different or something other from the past, being able to actually open up your home, whether it's Henderson, Summerlin, and the highly, sought after areas, the reality is that it doesn't become that house on the block, right? It becomes that family. And in turn, getting to know that family, we all have a story. And when we do that, essentially we actually change those children's lives. The parents also have the ability to be around other people who are doing other things. And in turn, naturally, I think humanly, it requires us to do more, because that's what we're actually around. And we're seeing that day to day.
Yeah, I love that focus, not that house, that family. It really brings it home to say, okay, what can we do for them? Or what can they do for us as well, right? Because we all rely upon each other. I rely upon my neighbors for whatever, going out of town, and they watch the house, or to have the kids out there and play, to have friends in the neighborhood. And so we rely on one another to, not only keep the community safe, but also to help our children build relationships that will hopefully be long lasting.
Absolutely. And that the concept of it takes a village, that has never changed. I think anymore now, it's a requirement more now than it was probably when we were growing up, when it was like the neighbor or that was sending you home, or when the street lights came on, right? It's like now anymore, I think it really takes that, because we're kind of losing the sight of that with social media, the computers, the gaming systems, things of that nature. So if the kiddos are still outside, they're playing, and there's neighbors that are like, hey, it's time to go home, or whatever that is, I think it's important to have that.
Yeah, and going back, I guess, to the point that you're saying, the benefit of buying versus renting, my mom rented houses throughout my childhood, and we moved around quite a bit, never had an established neighborhood. And now that I've been married, my wife and I have pretty much been in the same community for about 18 years. And for us, like, we would like to buy a new house, but it's just so hard to say we're going to buy a new house and pull our kids away from where they're at, because for them just to ride their bikes down to their friend's house or to ride their bikes to school, I think that's worth so much more than having a little bit more space.
Absolutely. And that becomes a challenge, right? And I think having the conversation with the kiddos, oftentimes they're like, no, don't pull me away from my friends. I can't do this. I'm not going to have any friends. And the anxiety kicks in. And all in all, we had the same challenges with our kids, and understanding that when that move took place, they are so resilient. They literally jumped right in. I think I was more like, what did I do? I have an extra drive of 10 minutes. And I'm thinking that happened for the first month. And then after that month, I'm like, oh no, this drive is so worth it, right? So I think it really comes down to what makes the most sense for the family. The kiddos are resilient. Thankfully, the move was not super far. So in turn, it was like in the immediate community neighborhood area. So it all works out. And if those same kids, they will find a way to get together. And us parents will be like, okay, what day, what time, where are we meeting? So it doesn't go away.
Yeah, because you upgraded your house. What is it? Was it in 2020, 22?
22.
In 22, you upgraded. And a lot of people are kind of sitting on the sidelines just waiting for something to happen in the market. But, you know, comparing this current market to where we were back in 2006 to 2009, I think it's a completely different market, because you have people who have a lot of equity in their home versus back then where, you know, they had the ninja loans.
Absolutely.
I don't know if any of those exist anymore.
Not at all. Not at all.
Right.
And to your point, being able to actually, like you said, being able to buy early on in 2008, 2009, kind of in that timeline, it's a different ballgame completely. Today, that market doesn't even exist. And moving forward, like you said, sitting on the sideline, we can wait to say, okay, well, we're waiting for this or we're waiting for that. But ultimately, if there's a need and you would want to do it, figure out how you can make it work, or if this is the right time to make it work. If it is, go for it. If it's not, then create a plan, but create a plan that's realistic, not around the interest rates, not around the ability of saying, hey, well, if I wait this, if I wait that, just go for it, right? But focus on what your plan is and stick to it, because you bought in 2022, the interest rates were up over 5%. You bought in 2024, the interest rates were up at 7%. Pick your own poison.
Yeah. And if those interest rates start to come down, which it sounds like there is some perspective or hope that they are going to start to come down, what's going to happen to the prices of the homes?
That's a really good question. We're actually waiting very patiently for September. We're told that the feds are going to actually drop the rates. By how much? We don't have a crystal ball. However, ultimately, this reminds me personally of the COVID season. During that timeline, it came down to, okay, well, interest rates are here. We're having a global pandemic, right? But when the actual rates came down to 4, 3, some 2%, people were like, what is going on, right? The demand flew through the roof. There were bidding wars. The highest bidding war that I saw is that an actual family purchased a home and they paid $100,000 over appraised value. What does that mean? That means that if you bought a house at $1 million, you're coming in with $100,000 cash out of pocket in additional aside from your loan. That's pretty substantial. And then you ask the question, if it's COVID, we're going through all of this stuff, as an actual world, how do you have that kind of money to really be able to justify something like that? But because the demand was so high and there were so many bidding wars, really that's kind of what it created. The demand went through the roof. People needed housing. People were relocating. People were unhappy in the home that they were in. There wasn't enough space. They were required to work from home. There wasn't an office for privacy per the corporation's guidelines. There were just so many factors. And you realize as well, if you had a family, you guys are probably on top of each other because if you didn't have enough space, it was pretty inevitable that you noticed that right away because you're like, why are you here? So in turn, it's like, we need more space. We need this. We need that, whatever that means. But being able to act on that because there's a need, once again, rather than just the ability of like, okay, well, rates are down, I want to go buy a home. No, you were definitely in the market competing substantially.
So lower interest rates could bode worse because the supply or limited supply is just going to continue to decrease.
Correct. And we find that when the rates go down, prices actually increase. And we are actually on target. As much as it feels like prices probably haven't gone up or they have gone up, I've heard both. Like, oh yeah, I bought my home 3 years ago and it's actually a little bit of appreciation. Or I bought my home 2 years ago and prices have gone up. Like the same house is worth X amount, right? But ultimately, prices are still going up. We are actually showing no signs of slowing down. And then we have the ones as well that kind of talk to, well, this is going to be just like 2008, 2009 when the market crashed. Well, no, we're in a totally different market. We were actually having challenges with the banks approving loans, on stated income. Let's face it. If you had a heartbeat, you get a loan. How much do you want it for, right? But the reality is that anymore, we're finding that a lot of buyers who are actually relocating to Las Vegas, and particularly, are cash buyers. They are not financing. So if we have a market that's strong with buyers who are coming in, buying properties cash, liquidating their properties for states like California or like Hawaii or like in New York, where the markets are completely different, much more expensive, then you're finding that they're coming here, buying their primary residence cash, investing in an investment property, renting it out, and they have that stability, right? So that kind of puts a damper on the locals, the ones who are here working in hospitality, who have been here and having a challenge with affordability. But we're just in a different market. The market's definitely strong, appreciation's happening, and it's not going away. So what the future holds with, obviously the election and the Fed's dropping rates and things of that nature, I do believe that it's going to create an actual demand of buyers who are kind of waiting. They're going to jump in.
Yeah. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe for more. Hit that bell so you can know when the next episode comes out.